In 1947, the United States Senate called its session to order, and the man who stood to pray over the most powerful legislative body in the world had no business being there. He had no college degree when he arrived in America, no connections, no money. He'd never set foot inside a seminary. He would later say he lacked, and these are his words, the poise, the balance, the preparation, the academic standing, the confidence, and the grace to be bridled in the pulpit. And yet, there he stood, chaplain of the United States Senate, pastor of the church where Abraham Lincoln once sat in the pews. How does a man like that end up in a place like that? This story is really about what happens when God turns a light on in a heart that's willing to follow, even when it can't see where the road goes. Peter Marshall was born in Coatbridge, Scotland, a blue-collar town near Glasgow. Working class family, no silver spoons, but God turned the light on in that Scottish village, and Peter felt called to the ministry, not just any ministry in America. He later wrote, I was coming to the United States to enter the ministry because I believed with all my heart that those were the orders from my chief, but I did not know how or when or where. So he bought a one-way ticket across the Atlantic because he believed God told him to go. On April 5th, 1927, Peter Marshall arrived in the United States with absolutely no idea what came next. 2 Samuel 7:8, God reminds King David, I took you from the sheepfold, from following the sheep, to be ruler over my people. It's almost as if he's saying, David, do you remember where you came from? Nobody saw a king, but I did. Peter Marshall was a working class kid from Coatbridge. Nobody saw a Senate chaplain, but God did. The problem is, between the sheepfold and the throne, there's a whole lot of middle. And the middle is where most people quit. Peter didn't land in America and walk straight into a pulpit. He got a regular job in New Jersey, worked with his hands, paid his bills, and waited. Eventually, he made his way to Birmingham, Alabama, and somebody asked him to teach a men's Bible study class. Not a mega church platform, not a conference stage, a handful of men in a room, small, unglamorous, the kind of thing the world wouldn't notice. But God noticed, and those men saw the call of God on Peter Marshall before Peter could even see it himself. When he was accepted at Columbia Theological Seminary in Georgia but couldn't afford it, those men, the ones he poured himself into week after week in that small room, wrote him a letter, and they paid for his entire first year of seminary. A Bible class nobody heard of, paid for a preacher nobody knew, because he'd been faithful in small things and God honored it. After seminary, Peter took a small church in Covington, Georgia, faithful, quiet, 3 years of service. Then a call to Westminster Presbyterian in Atlanta, and something changed. Peter's preaching was different. He was a man lit on fire. Students from Agnes Scott College started attending, then their friends, then their families. A church drifting towards closing its doors suddenly is overflowing. They set up loudspeakers in the parking lot, on the sidewalks, so the crowd could hear. It was there in Atlanta that Peter met a young college student named Catherine Wood. She'd come to hear him preach, and God had plans for them too. They fell in love and married. Then in 1937, 10 years after stepping off that boat from Scotland, came the call to preach in York Avenue Presbyterian Church in Washington, D.C. They called it the Church of Presidents. Abraham Lincoln had worshiped there. And they called a Scottish immigrant, no pedigree, no Ivy League degree, and by his own admission, no business being in that pulpit. But remember what someone said, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. In 1947, Peter Marshall was appointed chaplain in the United States Senate. But then, at the height of his success, tragedy struck. Peter Marshall died on January 25th, 1949. He was 46 years old, a heart attack, far too soon. And that could have been the end, a brilliant, brief life, a flame that burned bright and went out early. But God wasn't finished with the Marshall family. Catherine, the college student who'd fallen in love with his preaching, sat down after his death and started to write. She wrote his biography. She called it A Man Called Peter. It became a bestseller, then a movie. And then Catherine kept writing. More than 20 books, 16 million copies sold. Her novel, Christie, became a beloved television series. The school teacher who married a preacher from Scotland became one of the most widely read Christian authors of the 20th century. Catherine once wrote, "Dreams carried around in one's heart for years, if they are dreams with God's approval, have a way of suddenly materializing. When people saw a shepherd boy, God saw a king. When people saw an unpolished preacher, God saw a Senate chaplain. And when people saw a preacher's widow, God saw an author who could touch 16 million lives." 2 Samuel 7:8 reminds us again, "I took you from the sheepfold, from following the sheep, to be ruler over my people." That's what God does. He takes people from where they are, not from where the world says they should be, and puts them where he wants them. But between every starting point and every destination, there's a chain of small faithfulnesses. Peter Marshall didn't skip from Scotland to the Senate. He worked a job in New Jersey. He taught a Bible study class nobody heard of. He pastored a small town church. He was faithful in the little things, and God assigned him the bigger ones. Folks, I don't know what small thing God has in front of you. Maybe it's a Bible study with a handful of people. Maybe it's a dream in your heart you've been carrying for years. Proverbs 16:3 says, "Commit your works to the Lord, and your thoughts will be established. He shall bring it to pass." Not you, not me, him. You just have to keep showing up. A working class kid from Scotland, a one-way ticket across the Atlantic, a Bible class, a small town church, a sidewalk of people listening through loudspeakers, and a widow who kept writing. And that is what God does, because God loves you. Keep looking up. May God lift up your day.